Hello and welcome back to the Reaper. So we've been doing some minor work on circuits and trails, and it's very important. It basically means how we organise our landings. Our planes, they get into a circuit around a base and then they're called in. We've done some work on this before, but we thought we'd do a bit more of a detailed and show it in 3D just to help our guys and anyone else who's interested. So I'll pass over to Blood.
Trying to teach circuits is quite an interesting one. I'm sure some of you have seen the previous video we did about this. Unfortunately, it only gives a 2D representation, so it doesn't show you, the heights and what it looks like to the pilot. So here we just have the TAC view open, and we're just going to run through a circuit. So starting off, we are just going to take off from the runway. So cap if you click play. So you put full power on, you're climbing up. So at this point, you're trying to climb up to 300 meters altitude, or about 1,000 feet.
And is that a GL, I guess?
Yes, so that's above the surface of the runway, even if there is some height differences as there is here. On other parts of the circuit, you're always measuring from above the runway. So here we've reached 300 meters, and now you want to start initiating your turn to the left. So this is a nice, probably about 20-degree turn. So it's fairly aggressive.
So we've initiated that turn. Is there any set distance from the runway that we want to initiate the turn? Because one thing we've seen is that some people go a mile, some people go 10 miles, and no one's really sure how far to go, including myself.
So there's no set distance, but the general rule is once you are at 300 meters, you start the turn. So you level off and start the turn. Sometimes you can actually do a climbing turn if you have, an aircraft that's heavily loaded and particularly slow at taking off. You can just start a climbing turn, but it's good to not just carry on for miles upwind and to sort of get on with turning onto the circuit.
Roger that. One thing we have, our landings are very slow at the moment because we do have some guys who go out miles, and obviously sending an A10 out 10 miles takes a long time. Right, I will carry on standby.
Okay, so we're just coming out of the crosswind leg here onto the downwind leg. So what you want to be doing at this point is going through a work cycle. So you're going to be looking at the aircraft to make sure that there's nobody that you're going to run into, and you want to constantly going through height, heading, speed. Height, heading, speed. And if there's a slight difference in any of those, you just want to, a bit high, better pitch down, or a bit fast, better reduce the throttle. And just doing those small corrections so you fly a nice, steady, straight downwind leg. You want to be flying, 310 knots, 500 kilometers an hour airspeed. So that's another issue we've been having, is people have had varying downwind legs. And there are a few techniques of trying to work out when you want to make the turn, but the sort of general rule that I have is that you want to look over to the runway and think, whenever I make my turn, is how much approach I'm going to have, how long I'm going to have flying nice straight downwards when I come out of the base leg turn. And a lot of people tend to go 10 miles away, which is just a stupidly long distance. So here you can see probably about a quarter of a mile or something from the threshold.
Roger.
So another thing you can do to reduce the length of your approach is the base leg is done as a descending turn, ever so slight. So you come into it at about 300 meters of altitude. You want to be coming out at about 150. And therefore, the lower down you are, the shorter your approach needs to be, and you can get a nice glide slope.
So is this base leg onto finals, yes?
Yes, this is base leg.
Right, gotcha.
And so now we're just coming out the turn onto final. As you see, we're not that far away from the runway, but it's a good enough distance to get a good approach setup, but not so far away that you're having to, worry about descending too much. Yeah,
so this is great. You've literally come out of the turn, you've got a mile or something to fly, which is very little. So it would be great if we could do this small racetrack rather than the whopping great racetracks that we have, which is add time and causing us problems.
Yep, and touchdown. Right, if you pause it there, if we just zoom out a bit, we can see the circuit as a whole.
So this is all to scale with the runway. So let's say that's a 1 mile runway. That is, you can see roughly. So we've gone about a mile in this direction, east or whatever that is. We've gone north by about a mile. We've gone west past into the runway about 1.5 miles onto your finals. So if this was typical Grim Reapers, we would literally be going right over to this space here and in. So, but we want to keep it small like this because it saves a huge amount of time, and if you need to go around, which we do a lot, it just takes a minute rather than 10 minutes.
But the important thing I want to point out of this, it has to be flown accurately. And if you can fly this accurately in a circuit, it helps enormously later on doing other flying in combat, etc. Particularly with things like formation flying, if you're able to hold a particular height and speed.
Roger, so it's not just bouncing around roughly at height, you want to keep bang on the height.
Yeah, and it's all about that height heading speed. You want to be running through that work cycle because you want to correct any errors before they get significant. Because then all you're doing is tiny movements of the controls.
Roger, and also there's not really any excuse not to get it right, because when you're in this circuit, there's nothing else to concentrate on. There's no combat, you've got your comms, but there's very little comms you have to do, so yeah.
Yeah, I was going through some of our TAC views recently, and yeah, our circuits are, they're fundamentally flying in roughly the right places, but they're quite, bouncy, shall we say.
So this time we're coming in from a different place, and we're going to enter the circuit. That's what we're doing here, right?
Yeah, so this is, we've flown, we've perhaps just come off a mission, we want to do an overhead join. So this is one thing that I found people can't quite visualize in their heads. Or at least not with the 2D view of things. So first of all, we're a decent distance from the airfield at the moment. This is when you want to be starting to think about how you're going to set up. In this case, we are quite well set up because the runway is runway 12. But what we want to do is, when you're approaching the airbase, go right. You make your radio call saying you want to join overhead. That will then give you the circuit direction and the runway that's being used. And then you want to look at your compass. In this case, you would have been told left-hand runway 12, and you want to think, right, where is the direction 12 relative to me? And in this case, it's heading pretty much directly away from me. So that means, right, if the runway's heading away from me, that means the overhead join also has to be heading in front of me. So in this case, all I need to do is make sure that I am to the right-hand side of the runway, because it's a left-hand circuit. We want to join on the dead side, and try and get myself to the right and down to 600 meters. So if we play.
4 miles away. 3.
So it's around here, about 2 miles from the runway. You want to call initials.
Initials here.
So that's saying that you're at that initial point, which is pretty much fixed 2 miles from the runway, meaning that either the ATC or anybody in the circuit knows where you are.
We're well into the dead side by half.
So if we just pause it here, if we look, our altitude should be around 600 meters AGL, and at this point you want to be looking into the circuit to get you want to be doing a visual look to see who's there, where are they, because you're going to have to turn into the traffic. And so you want to be looking out, where is that traffic? Who am I going to potentially bump into? When should I make the turn to avoid them? Should there be any traffic? In this case, it's clear, so we can turn pretty much whenever we want. So let's go forward.
So you're only looking to the left, in this case, on the live side.
Yeah, because that's where you know all the traffic is to the left of the runway. So I've determined the circuit's clear. Now you want to turn, but you crucially don't want to descend. Now I've crossed the runway, and at this point you want to start pitching your aircraft down, but keep turning. So now we're descending down to 300 meters. When you hit 300 meters, level off. And when you're now going parallel to the runway, that's when you want to be putting wings level, and you can carry on with your normal circuit.
So have you joined at the end of this turn, where my cursor is now, have you joined the circuit at that point?
Yes, so I've now merged with the downwind.
Right, and would you start your call? Would you call the downwind? You are actually on a downwind here, then, right? Yes,
so you're on a downwind there. The first call you'd make is joining overhead, so you do that way before you get anywhere near the. So that's basically when you're crossing over the runway. Then here, once you're on the downwind, you make your downwind call, except with a slight tweak, because normally you make the downwind way quite a bit further back. You instead say late downwind.
Right, okay. And we're down to circuit altitude now of 300 meters or 1,000 feet, and the proper speed. Okay, cool.
And we just carry on as before.
And in this typical scenario, would you go on to base leg and land, or would you do a full circuit before we land?
No. You're now into the circuit. There's no need to do a whole extra one. You go on to base leg and land, as we were about to see.
Roger, unless, I guess, unless the tower asks you to go around, but yes, gotcha.
Yes, if the tower asks you to go around, you go around. So one thing that's very important to note is a lot of people try and descend before they cross the runway. So if we fast forward a bit, just after I've taken off again, we can see here, if we just pause at that point, if you look, my altitude is about 270 meters-ish. If I was to descend to 300 before crossing the runway, there's a very good chance that you might hit traffic taking off.
Right.
So that's why it's very important to stay at 600 meters, 2,000 feet.
So what we're talking
until
about...
you've crossed the runway.
So we're talking about this joining into the circuit here.
Yep.
And what's the name of this move here? Is that what it is?
So that's joining overhead. You'd make the ready call joining overhead when you're doing that.
So when we're joining overhead, we're joining over ideally at least double the height of the circuit. So at least
it's 1,000 feet above, yeah.
1,000 feet or 300 meters above the circuit height. The reason is that the guys taking it off the runway are going to be pretty much up to circuit height by the time at the end of the runway, and potential clashes. So, right, that's something we need to drum into everyone's head then. Okay.
Yep, and it's only after you've crossed that threshold are you clear to start descending into turn. Okay, so for this one we're going to do something known as a run-in and brake. It's quite similar to an overhead join, except we're just going to be doing a lot faster and we're going to be turning much sooner. So again, you want to be looking at the runway. You're going to make your radio call and you're going to be told again, runway 12, left hand. So you need to try and work out where the circuit and runway is.
So for a run-in brake, are we ideally coming in from the dead side at 90 degrees like this, or can we come in from anywhere?
No, we want to be doing exactly the same manoeuvre we've just done for the overhead join, so coming via initials, but we need to try and work out how we're going to get to initials at this point. So you could be coming in from a runway from all sorts of different angles, so this is just demonstrating coming in from a particular one.
Right.
So if we now go to the cockpit view, this is what you'd see. You've got the runway in front of you there, and you've just been told that it's runway 12, it's a left-hand circuit. So first of all, you need to determine, relative to me, where is the runway, the active runway. And if you look at your compass, you'll see that it's going to your right and just towards you. So that means the initial point should be just off to you, probably about 11 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So if we click play...
Speed times 2?
Go 4.
Off we go.
So we need to turn off to the left and do 180 degree turns so we can get round onto that initial point.
Roger.
We also probably want to start descending here because we're a little bit high. We want to end up at 600 meters, 2 miles from the runway.
So when we hit the initial point, do we always want to be on that same vector, i.e. the same vector as the runway?
Yes. So you're always coming in the same direction as the active runway.
So you don't come into initials at any angle. By the time you hit your initial, you should be on runway vector.
Yep.
Okay, that's important.
So I'll just turn on here. That's initials. So pause it there. So far, it's pretty much exactly the same as the regular overhead join, except you can see that my airspeed is about 500 knots. So it's very fast, and you can do this maneuver at some pretty hefty speeds. Mm-hmm. So the aim of this is you can come in flying from wherever. You don't have to slow down. You don't have to set yourself up in terms of speed. And what we're now going to do is join onto the downwind, but we're going to bleed off our speed. Mm-hmm. So if we click play... we'll go to 2 times speed as well. So now this is a very tight turn. Can you see I'm all the way on my side there?
Yeah.
Pause. So I've tried this a few times where you do one continuous 180 degree turn. But in order to bleed off your speed, you need to be quite tight. And if you do one continuous turn, you're going to have a very, very tight base leg. Mm-hmm. So the better way to do this is you do one 90 degree turn very tightly, and then you do another 90 degree turn, again very tightly once you reach the downwind.
So we're going a mile or so, whatever feels reasonable, then another 6 or 7 G turn. Pull.
And you should see the airspeed is coming down to about 500 kilometers an hour. It's a little bit slow, but that's okay because we can add a bit more power. Mm-hmm. And carry on the circuit as normal.
Okay, so we're on the finals now.
Okay, so a lot of people sort of wonder, how do you actually land? People can get a general gist of it, but there's a very good technique to land pretty much all aircraft very easily every time. So here we are, we're just coming out of base leg onto finals, and we're going to start our approach. So if you click play.
What speed do you want it at?
Go for speed 1. So this is in real time. So one thing I want to point out, can you see the flight path indicator?
That one.
Your mouse over it there. That is where we're going to end up. Is if we touch nothing, that's where we're going to keep going to. So that's very important. Now we're on our approach, and all we have to do now is worry about 2 things. Firstly, that flight path indicator needs to be on the threshold of the runway. As you can see, it's just on there now. The second thing we want is our speed needs to be constant. So, for example, in the Vigan, our speed needs to be about 300 kilometers an hour. You can do it a little bit slower. But all you have to do now is go speed, threshold. And if there is, for example, you start losing a bit of speed, you want to increase the power to compensate. If the flight path indicator starts dropping, you want to pitch up. But you've also got to remember that if you pitch up, that means you're going to lose a bit of speed, so it's trying to coordinate both the throttle and the pitch simultaneously. And if you do these lots of little movements, you can see you get a nice, smooth touchdown, flare when you're at the end, and you land.
Because quite a lot of us end up landing halfway down the runway, and that's usually, I mean, that's not so bad nowadays, but that's usually what ends up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, so with some of the aircraft, they can stop fairly quickly. The Vigan's a great example of that. But others, if you have a brake failure or something, or you need to go around, you want as much runway as you can get in order to save yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no reason not to land on the threshold. So we go back a bit just to look at the flare. So if you look at the flight path indicator, you can also see the horizon line just above it. Mm-hmm. The difference between your flight path indicator and the horizon line is your rate of descent. So for the flare, all you have to do is put your flight path indicator just below the horizon, and that means that your rate of descent will be nice and smooth.
Roger, so let's just look at that again. So our vector, which is here, we want to, doing our flare, just keep it just below this line.
Yeah, it's possibly not the best aircraft to show this in, because the flare is very slight in the Vigan.
Yeah. Okay.
You may also be wondering that there's lots of aircraft that don't have this flight path indicator. You kind of have to imagine where that is, and typically you can find in some aircraft you have to keep the threshold runway fixed relative to your cockpit. So for many it's about a third of the way up the HUD is where you want to keep that runway fixed, and then you're just using speed threshold. Hope that's been useful for everyone.
Yes, thank you very much, and we'll use that for our personal training, and we hope that it's useful for other people as well. Lovely job. See you later.